back to the Pup and Away podcast. My name is Stephanie. I am the pro dog mom. I'm also a certified dog trainer, canine behaviorist, and canine nutritionist in San Antonio, Texas, and the very proud owner of Pup and Away in San Antonio, Texas, where we specialize in pet care with the behavioral edge. Today we're going to be talking about aligning expectations with training goals. So this is something that I have to do often. I love working with a variety of different people. People hire me to work with them and their dog for some sort of training goal. In our classes, it's normally just basic manners, right? In our private lessons, it's usually a little bit more behavior modification, whether we're working on something like your dog is leash reactive, or they're nervous, or they're scared, or they're just doing something that you don't absolutely love. And in these conversations, sometimes I have to realign expectations that the client might have to what might actually be a little bit more reasonable or attainable throughout the training process. So let's go ahead and get to it. When you imagine getting a dog, you probably had a certain idea in your head. You would go everywhere with this dog. You go to dog parks, bars together. Maybe you'd go hiking every weekend together, take them to doggy daycare. Like in your mind, you just had a very specific idea of what owning a dog will look like, right? You bought the books, you listened to the podcast, you went to the training classes, and yet your dog is perfect and you love them, but also not that quite perfect thing that you pictured in your head and doesn't quite meet all the expectations you had. So let's break down some of the most common expectations that I usually have to realign as your chosen pet professional. The first one is the puppy class goer whose dog is still reactive or under-socialized as an adult. We are taught through culture, through media, that if you take the puppy classes, your dog is just going to grow up and be like the most perfect, well-socialized dog ever, right? A lot of people want a fresh start. They opt to get a puppy. They go to puppy classes to work on socialization and puppy manners. And this is a great plan, but it still does not guarantee that you're going to create a dog that is this ideal version in your head. You have to remember that dogs are creatures who have genetically coded personalities, and that everyday experiences further shape those personalities. So let's first talk about the DNA part of that. Did you know that the stressors that a mom faces while she's pregnant can have a huge effect on a puppy's temperament, along with their birth weight, their brain development, and neurodevelopment? According to the United States Department of Agriculture, this is a quote from them: Stress triggers the release of hormones such as cortisol in the bloodstream. When these hormones cross the placenta from mother to pups, it changes the set point of the puppy's stress response system. Stress also alters the quality of maternal care, which affects later behavior as puppies. As adults, these puppies are likely to be more fearful and anxious and may react more strongly to stressful experiences. End quote there. So, of course, if you know anything about me and you've listened to some of my other podcasts, you know that I like to go and try to find the science to really break some of this down. I couldn't find a lot of studies specifically on dogs, but there's a lot of studies on humans and, unfortunately, of course, rats. And I think that the findings from these studies could be extrapolated to our canine friends. So let's talk about some of those studies. In a study of rats, the rats were born to stressed mothers. So they unfortunately, this is so terrible. They did things to these poor rats that were pregnant to create stressed mothers. And then they had a control group of non-stressed mothers. So the rats that were born to the stressed mothers possessed stress systems that were more reactive than average. Their cortisol levels increase more in response to stress, and they take longer to decrease than the cortisol levels of rats born to mothers who were not deliberately stressed. So what we find is they get even more stress, like the amount of stress that they feel is higher than the control. And also it took them a lot longer to calm down and kind of reset to baseline. That's something that I'm kind of learning a little bit more about in dog training, is the stress cycle. Like, at what point does it take for a certain being to complete a stress cycle to get us back to baseline? And the very interesting thing is, it's such a complicated system it's dependent on the dog. It depends on a bunch of different things, but it's something definitely to kind of consider. What I'm trying to get at here is that your puppy might be pre-wired to be a little bit more reactive and to have a little bit more stress in their system, or to just find that threshold a lot faster. For example, if they were born in a shelter, or if their litter was dumped on the side of the road, even if the mom was pregnant on the streets, brought into like a shelter or a foster home, and then had the babies in this rescue or foster home, there can still be a lot of stress built up in there depending on what exactly the mom was experiencing while she was on the streets. So it's kind of like a genetic generational trauma, I guess. And I'm very interested to see just like how far this goes down the lineage, because I once worked with a client who had a little pack of dogs that I was hired to help structuralize their routine. She had, I can't remember anymore, I think 3 huskies and then 2 mixes. And the one that we're talking about in this conversation was one of the mixes. And in my initial meeting with this family, I asked a ton of questions about each dog. Personality type, what's their routine, what is their involvement with each other, what does their dynamics look like, with each interpersonal connection that they're building within that group of dogs. And one dog in particular, this one that we're talking about, she was like feral. She was like, she never was aggressive, but you can tell that she was just so uncomfortable with my presence being there. She would keep her eye on me. She'd be on the furthest part of the room. If I would move, she would also just like kind of get up and like slink around. Like, this is what we would call like a true feral dog. Does not want to be anywhere close to humans and is just so nervous and scared of us. But then come to find out, she was also like that with her parents. So it was an older couple that was my client, male and female, and the mom figure, the female client, was the one that she was better off with, but even still had to take a lot of, coaxing and different things. So I thought this dog was literally feral. Like, I thought they had just gotten this dog not too long ago and picked her up off the streets, right? Nope. She was actually born into the house. Her human parents actually had this dog's mother before she passed away, and also the mother of that dog was the one that was feral. So in other words, the grandmother of my doggy client was the one that was feral, and the generations after who were given the right home environment literally from the very beginning, like my doggy client, was still operating with an out of whack stress system. She still could not deal. So even with, she's the 3rd generation being from this grandmother, she still had a really hard time and still had a lot of those feral qualities. So even if your puppy is dealing with that royal flush handout of a perfect stress system, they still also have to go through adolescence, which we talked about before, and contains a fear period and also an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex. This leaves your puppy without cognitive control of their emotions and a rush to explore new stimuli, even though they lack that puppy bounce back like they once had. So your puppy may still enter into adulthood with blemishes on their social ability. So going through that fear period, going through adolescence, all of these stages are very sensitive periods, whether it's your puppy and we're going through that initial puppy socialization stage where everything we want to encourage our dog to meet all the things, but then we go into adolescence where even just one negative experience can kind of have a really big consequence for long term. It's still very sensitive periods that can still, I don't want to say mess up your dog, but it still shapes what your dog is, how your dog perceives the world, and just their personality in general. So all in all, just going to puppy classes alone is not going to create your most ideal dog. You have to also work through all the different experiences throughout their life, and especially adolescence. All right, number 2. You thought that training would last a lifetime without any maintenance training. Whether you are talking about exposing your puppy to novel stimuli, kind of like what we just talked about, or teaching your dog of any age, any trick, any basic manner, if you don't use this behavior with your puppy, your puppy will lose it. If you don't use it, your puppy will lose it. So let's talk about the scenario first, and use Sully as an example, my miniature schnauzer. He met a young kid once when he was about 2 or 3 months old. when I came home from college for Christmas. So I went to College Station. I didn't have a bunch of kids around me. I came home for Christmas. He met my nephew, who I think was like 3 or 4 at the time. And I was like, check, Sully met a kid. Wonderful. Then we went back to school, and he didn't see a kid again for a long time. This one positive exposure to kids did not last Sully a lifetime. He didn't experience the stimulus of kids with positivity often enough to form strong neural pathways in the brain. So now he hates kids. So when it comes to things like basic manners, also, you spend a lot of time, a lot of money, you work with a trainer, you go to the puppy classes, or you start training with the dog that you just adopted, only to find that some behaviors aren't there months or years later. I once had a client I was working with in private lessons who had a really young puppy. She was super cute. During the first lesson, we worked a lot on recall or coming when called. At the next lesson, they said that part of the training was going great, and so they wanted to kind of change their focus to potty training instead, which was proving to be a challenge. So we did that. Weeks later, I check in on the recall training, and the dog was concerned because the once beautiful, awesome recall was no more. He said something along the lines of like, I thought once I trained something, it would always be there. And to that, my response was, well, it depends, like everything else, right? It depends. If the behavior is something that your dog intrinsically enjoys and finds joy in doing, it will, because that reinforcement pattern stays there naturally, right? But if not, you need to keep working to keep the motivation alive, to keep the behavior well-oiled. So this dog, because they did a lot of diligent work to build the recall, she was getting 1, lots of practice doing it, and then number 2, lots of reinforcement doing it. And then they completely switched gears, they completely forgot about that behavior, stopped doing it, and then, weeks later, they're like, oh, she should be perfect at that all over again, right? Not really, because we stopped working on it. Another example, and let's kind of put this like in human terms, is not speaking a language for some time. Even if it's your native language, you become rusty if you haven't spoken that language, and then you try all over again. So again, repetition will make these neural pathways strong, and maintenance training will keep those neural pathways strong. Your brain can only hold so much information before it has to dump out old information to make space for new information. So if you're not using that old information, your brain says, I don't need that anymore. Let's go ahead and create this space so that way this new information has some room to fit. This is my excuse on why I forget policies that I don't deal with every day, even in my own company. So we create policies and procedures. I, of course, am the owner of the company, so everything gets the okay by me. Months later, we're talking about something similar or maybe that exact same issue, and I completely forget that policy that I came up with in the first place because it doesn't involve me every single day, and I constantly have a really big input of information into my brain at all times. So my brain got rid of that information because it wasn't relevant to me, right? I didn't use it, so I lost it. So maintenance training is extremely important for anything. Even highly trained dogs like police dogs, military dogs, they still have to go through maintenance training even when they are still using those same techniques every single day on the job. All right, number 3, this is a big one. The right and best socialization for my dog is daycare. This is the expectation that you have, and I have to realign that expectation, all right? So at my company, Pup and Away, we offer different levels of socialization programs because socialization is on a spectrum. We use what's called an orientation assessment to decide which socialization program is best for each individual dog. And it's based on a number of different factors. And sometimes when we tell a client that their dog fits into anything other than what you would consider regular group doggy daycare, they get concerned. So for a second, let's talk about what regular group doggy daycare is, right? Kind of what you might think about when you hear the term doggy daycare. You think of a group of a ton of dogs, and they're all in there, supervised by however many people. This is what typical doggy daycare is, right? And so when people are coming and looking for a socialization program, that's what they think of in their brain. And when we tell the client that, yeah, based off of all of the different things we have, your dog does well in A, B, C, or D, and none of those things are what they have in mind as regular doggy daycare, they get concerned. Some people want us to do more training to get their dog ready for doggy daycare. People think there is something wrong with their dog, or that their dog is bad if they don't make it into what you would consider regular doggy daycare, and that just simply is not the case. A little more than half of the dogs that we meet would do better in something else besides doggy daycare. So it's actually the norm. A little more than half the dogs that we meet would do better in a socialization program other than what you think of a regular doggy daycare, and would do better and even thrive if the pet parents would just accept their dog's socialization preferences and allow us to give their dog what their dog needs and wants, versus trying to make their dog into something that the pet parent thinks is quote unquote correct or right. So again, this is an opportunity that my team and I take to educate pet parents on the fact that, just like you and I, not all dogs think big active events are fun. We also have to educate pet parents that over time, their dog's preferences may change. Again, just like you and I, I'm not doing the same thing for fun in my 30s that I was doing as a teenager or even in my 20s. If I was, you would totally be judging me, right? So I think that, social media and just, culture in general tells us that the right thing for your dog is to go get exercise, and the easiest thing to do is for your dog to go to doggy daycare. So that's what's normal. What we need to do as a society is normalize the fact that more than half of the dogs don't truly enjoy doggy daycare. And we'll talk about why in a different episode, and we'll talk about like this social ability spectrum that dogs are on, and kind of how it is that less than 0.5%, that doesn't make any sense, less than half of the dogs that we meet actually are good candidates for doggy daycare. All right, my next expectation, my last one that I usually have to kind of quite realign for a pet parent, is breed-specific tendencies. And I can't generalize that really, because it depends honestly on the dog and the breed. But another opportunity where I have to align expectations is when I have a training client who doesn't love what their dog is doing, even though it plays a part to who they are as a breed. Now, training can always be done, but to what level are we going to meet our goal might depend on the breed of the dog. So I'll give 2 examples where I worked a little bit of behavior modification successfully, but also had to change the pet parent's expectation of the final result. I worked with a client who wanted to work on reducing reactivity on her beagle. If you know anything about beagles, it's most likely that they are vocal. They're not just vocal, but they are loud and they carry on. Like a husky who might howl or scream, a beagle bays or yells. And it's a very deep, throaty, whoo kind of noise. Now, this client made tremendous strides. She was able to pass by cats and other dogs with less reactivity, both in the frequency and also in the intensity of the reactivity than when she first started working with me. At one lesson, she turned to me and she said, "He does well most of the times, but sometimes he just puts his nose down to the ground and starts to bark." And to that I said, "That's literally what beagles are bred to do." And she replied something along the lines of, "Oh, you're absolutely right." This client was already really happy with the progress that we were making, but reframing it like that for her made her even more excited and proud of the progress that they had made. And it also kind of allowed for her to realize it's okay for him to sometimes bark like that, because it's literally pre-wired genetically in his DNA to do that. And and the funny thing is she the way I'm a Schnauzer girl, she's a beagle lady. And so she even has another beagle who isn't reactive. And she was like, "How come this one?" And I'm like, "I don't know. He's the most beagle of all the beagles that you've ever beagled with. I'm not quite too sure." But still, again, realigning that expectation made her more proud of the progress that we had already made, but also allowed for her to be comfortable and to give herself and her dog permission to, it's okay if it's not perfect, And even still, sometimes, even though I'm working with other dogs that may not be beagles, I still tell everyone, yeah, but they're a dog and sometimes they're going to bark. I mean, I got 2 Schnauzers and they ain't perfect. They're going to bark sometimes, right? Another example, I had another client who hired me to work on some leash manners with their, I am not going to say this correctly, and I'm going to try very hard and I'm going to sound foolish, Basset Fave de Brittany. It's a French Basset Hound. It's a cousin of the Basset Hound based out of France. So if you want to go listen to how it's actually said, go Google it. I tried Googling it and I still tried my best and probably did not succeed very much. So when I hear leash manners from a client, I usually think, okay, this dog's pulling like crazy. She's trying to get ahead. She's tangling her parents up with the leash. But when I asked, what exactly does that mean for you, leash manners? They mentioned that she simply just stops and lies down and doesn't want to move. So I asked if there's a certain distance or amount of time that they've been walking, and maybe that's when she stops, thinking, okay, maybe it's an endurance issue and she gets tired. Nope, it's random. So you go for a walk, right? Because sometimes, as much as I don't want to recreate the inappropriate behavior, sometimes it is helpful for me to see it, so then that way I can help the client figure out what's going on. So we go for a walk, and sure enough, this pupper just randomly stops, puts on the brakes in the middle of a stride, and she just lays down in the middle. She's not nervous or scared of anything in the environment. She just decided that she doesn't want to move anymore. At other times, she is hot on the scent and she's pulling like crazy, just kind of like we talked about the beagle a little while ago. This client was concerned that their dog wasn't getting enough exercise because she kept plopping down, so they weren't able to go for a nice long walk, right? So she's a hunting breed, right? Basset Hounds, she's a hound. She's a hunting breed who must need a ton of exercise, right? So again, this is where we get this notion that culture tells us, if you have a dog, be prepared to give it a ton of exercise, and especially if it's a working dog, you're going to have to really dedicate a lot of time for that. So the pet parents were like, I have a hunting dog, I have a working dog, I must give her lots of exercise. How could she get lots of exercise if she wasn't willing to go the distance? And I'm not gonna lie, I was not familiar with this breed, and something told me that this little problem was related to her breed. So I researched the breed, and sure enough, a rather unexplained, not formally named phenomenon called flat basset exists, where dogs in the Basset family just decide that they don't want to move along anymore. First of all, it's a fun thing to say, flat Basset, but yeah, the parents thought it was a hoot as well. Another note about this dog breed is that she falls in the scent hound category and also has very short, stumpy legs. So for her, the perfect exercise doesn't mean moving her short little legs for a long distance, but instead to follow her nose for short distances. And when I laid out that information for the client, they first laughed, again, because it's called flat Basset, but instantly found relief knowing that they were indeed giving their dog what she needed. They just had to shift their expectations of what that actually meant. We still worked some exercises, and the client was able to achieve some stronger strides without the dog flattening out. But more importantly, they shifted their expectation to what would benefit their dog the most. So there's two specific things that made both of these cases still successful, even though we were kind of fighting against, these breed expectations. And first, the clients were rock stars and they were doing their homework. They knew that if they wanted to see changes, they had to put in the work. Second, these clients were open-minded and shifted their expectations easily and non-begrudgingly. All in all, when it comes to our expectations, I think there's a lot of general information and depictions of what a perfect dog should look like out there, and it kind of muddles with our brains a bit. While we expect dogs to be boundless bundles of joy, like us, they have preferences and they have boundaries. While the internet says working breeds need endless exercise and stimulation, what does that look like for your specific dogs? Our dogs are living beings that life experiences shape and mold. They're not a meal that you can custom order from a drive-thru. It's okay to strive for something and to have goals as long as they are attainable and you're willing to shift those expectations depending on your dog and what is best for them and for you. Now, that might be the end of the episode, but the fun doesn't have to stop here. Follow us online. We have quite a few social media platforms. You can find us on TikTok at PupPupAndAway. You can find us on Instagram at PupPupAndAwaySA or at Steph the Pro Dog Mom. You can also find us on Facebook at PupPupAndAwaySA. If you are in San Antonio and want to bring your dog to us for boarding, training, socialization, or nutrition, come find us. But if you're not in SA, we do training and nutrition sessions virtually. Yes, they can be just as effective, I promise. Please rate, review, and subscribe to my podcast on whatever platform you listen on. And please, please, please share with a friend. The positive reinforcement of knowing people actually listen to this and find it valuable helps motivate me to keep recording. We'll see you guys at the next episode.